Since you started your campaign here in January of 2007, I've watched it very closely, and there are a couple issues where you seem to have changed your position or evolved or sometimes flipped. For example, back in August, you were asked about this. If you were president in 2009 and Congress brings you a bill to outlaw smoking nationwide in public places, would you sign it? Huckabee, I certainly would. And then a few months later, your office says the governor believes that this issue is best addressed at the local and state level. And then this.
Well, you want me to answer that?
Well, I'm going to just go through a couple. Right. This, when you were governor, wrote a letter to President Bush about Cuba. U.S. policy on Cuba has not accomplished its stated goal of toppling the Castro regime and instead has provided Castro with a convenient excuse for his own failed system of government. I urge you to join with me in working to lift the failed embargo. You then went to Florida and said, no, the embargo should stay. And you said this, what changed was, I'm running for president. And then on taxes, I asked you specifically when you announced here, would you sign a pledge promising not to raise taxes? And here was your answer.
I think that it's a very dangerous position to make pledges that are outside the most important pledge you make, and that is the oath you take to uphold the Constitution and protect the people of the United States.
33 days later, here's what I read. Huckabee signed the Presidential Taxpayer Protection Pledge on March 2nd, 2007, during the Conservative Political Action Conference. It seems that political expediency got a hold of you several times during the campaign.
Now, let me go through each of those. First, on the smoking ban. I was asked if that was presented to me, would I sign it? I signed a similar bill in my state which said that we are not banning smoking, we are protecting clean air in the workplace. I still believe that there is a fundamental right that people have to do damage to themselves, but they do not have a right to do damage to others in a workplace. That's the basis on which I would sign the state law and the basis upon which I would sign a federal. When I said that I still believe that it's best handled at the state level, it is.
But you would sign a federal law?
If it were about a clean air workplace, not about banning smoking. Because the point is, and I know it may sound trivial, but it's important to me philosophically, that you're not telling an individual what he or she can't do. You're saying what you cannot do is to infringe upon the right of another to have clean air. On the second issue, which was about the embargo, that was specifically referenced to the rice industry in my state, #1 agricultural product. At that time, we were really hurting in our rice markets. And based on my experience as a governor, and particularly as the governor of the #1 rice producer in the nation, we wanted to export our rice, including to Cuba. The more I became familiar with the oppression of Cuba, and as I visited with many of the Cuban-American leaders in Florida, I realized that my position was frankly rather short-sighted, and it was based on my rather local agricultural concerns rather than the more important concerns of Cuba's oppressive regime. So I had to recognize that the embargo did have an important effect and should be kept. The final issue was the tax pledge.
I will not raise taxes, and I'm not going to sign a pledge.
Right. The reason I ended up signing the pledge, after I met with Grover Norquist for Americans for Tax Reform, realized that what I was signing was to say that we would not raise marginal tax rates, and frankly, I see no reason or no purpose ever that we need to raise marginal tax rates in this country. In fact, I've taken a more rather dramatic position than that. I think we ought to implement the fair tax, which would eliminate all taxes on productivity, move us to a consumption tax instead. That's the position that I hold. I think it would have a dramatically positive impact on our economy because it would stop the penalization of productivity and it would eliminate the IRS. So my position now is probably the most conservative of any of the candidates running for president as it relates to taxes.
But in all candor, you did not modify your position in order to play to the conservative base.
It wasn't to play. It was that I realized that my position had to mature in each of these areas. In the case of the rice issue, it's one thing to be the governor of Arkansas. To be the president of the United States, I've got to lead the whole country and act in the best interest of how we can best deal with a rogue regime.